Language is constantly evolving, and one of the most important changes in modern English is the move towards gender-neutral vocabulary. In today's episode, we'll explore how English has developed from gender-specific words like fireman and policeman to more inclusive terms like firefighter and police officer. We'll look at why these changes matter and how they're used in day-to-day English and how you can use them naturally and confidently. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. If you're a new listener, you're especially welcome. We love to have new listeners. My name's Craig.
And my name's Reza.
And with nearly 60 years of teaching English between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you doing, Reza?
I'm doing very well, thanks. We've already recorded a podcast and those very nice homemade cookies perked me up a bit. So you've given me a sugar boost. I'm ready to record our next one.
Well, let's go for it. The first thing this week is a voice message from friend of the show, Enrique from Seville.
Hello, Craig and Reza. Firstly, I would like to thank you for your podcast, which is very useful to me. I'm Enrique, an English student from Seville, and I would like to ask you for your help with something that I always find difficult. As a student, I know the importance of reading in English to improve. But I often find that books or articles are too advanced for me. Could you please recommend some books, articles, or web publications suitable for an upper intermediate level of English? I'm referring to content unrelated to learning English. So thank you again for your help. Have a great day. Bye.
Well, thank you very much, Enrique. Lovely to hear from you. And a very good question, isn't it? I mean, many people want to improve their reading skills, and what can you read? I mean, you might find it too difficult to just open a book and start reading in English, especially if you don't have an advanced level. What do you think?
Yes, there are a few books which are good for all levels, but on the whole, books designed for native speakers have a mixture of very basic, very simple language and very complicated because they're not planned specifically for they're not planned specifically for non-native speakers. So, Craig, I think the most obvious choice is a graded reader.
Yes, a graded reader is a book that has been adapted for your level of English, and according to the CEFR, and now I have to remember what that acronym means. Is it the Common European Framework for languages, or reference for languages? Something like that. So that gives you a level of B1, B2, C1, C2, etc. And these graded readers are adapted for your level. I'm going to put some links in the show notes to this episode so that you can find some graded readers for your level. And to see the show notes, go to inglespodcast.com/619 for this episode 619. Now, we have mentioned reading before, haven't we? And we've also recommended specific books before.
Yes, we have. In fact, I recommended a book to a student of mine only about a month ago, and it's one of those rare books that it's not a high level, it's a classic, it's brilliant, and everyone can enjoy it. I recommended Animal Farm, George Orwell, a classic. The language is not hard. It's not hard at all, and yet it's a really famous book. In Spanish, it's called Rebelión en la Granja, if that rings a bell, but in English, Animal Farm. It's not difficult at all, and that's because some authors, George Orwell was one of them, was obsessed, quite rightly in my opinion, with not overcomplicating language. So he went out of his way to make language interesting, but not overly complicated. So there are a few authors out there who keep it nice and simple for you, but have interesting language.
Yes, and another author who does a similar thing, simplifying language so that it's quite accessible to students who don't have a very high level, is Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway. So The Old Man and the Sea, for example, it's a very short book and not too difficult to read. But we have other suggestions. If you go to episode 177, inglespodcast.com/177, the topic of the podcast is how to write an email to a technical support team, but we also give lots of recommendations in answer to another student's question of books to read, and also how to improve your reading skills might be useful for Enrique and other students who want to read a lot. And that's episode 280. So inglespodcast.com/280. One small thing, Enrique, about pronunciation. Be careful of the pronunciation of level. Different levels of English. And Reza mentioned graded readers. There's also a link to the Oxford University Press website where you can find a list of reading books, and also the Extensive Reading Foundation. There's a link to that website, and that also has recommendations of different books. And I think Enrique's got the right idea. He doesn't want typically to read about English. He wants to read about different subjects. So as general advice, I would suggest finding books that speak about things you're interested in. And that obviously goes as well for any hobbies you have, any personal interests, photography, technology, travel, whatever you like. Then try and find content on the internet or magazines and books that speak to your interests so that you're interested in what you're reading. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, I could tell you what not to do, Enrique and all listeners. Don't do what I did when I just arrived in Spain and I didn't speak any Spanish, and I thought, okay, we've got to learn the Spanish language. So what's a very Spanish thing to do? I know, I shall read El Quijote, Don Quixote. That was not a good idea. So obviously to read it in Spanish would have been totally wasted on me. So I read it entirely in English first, got the idea into my head, then read it entirely in Spanish, and then to check, went back and read it in English again. But to be honest, reading it in Spanish was pretty much a waste of time for a complete beginner, because I had to stop every 4 words to look them up in an age before internet existed. So don't do that. Start with something easier. Don't go straight into Shakespeare. Maybe not. George Orwell or a graded reader or something like that. That's where you want to start.
That's a very good piece of advice. And another tip for you, you can grade your own text by using AI. So you would take a text that maybe is a bit too difficult for you, you paste it into ChatGPT, for example, and you say something like, I'm a B2 level learner of English and I would like to improve my reading skills. Please adapt this text for a B2 level. And I'm actually doing this with some books that are that don't have copyright, so they're quite old now and the language is quite difficult because it's not modern English. I have completely modified Tom Sawyer because it's quite old-fashioned English and can be quite difficult, so I've simplified that to more or less a B2 level, and I'm at the moment modifying Moby Dick by Herman Melville, is it?
Herman Melville, yeah.
Herman Melville. That was written in 1951, so you can imagine the English is not the same as it is these days. And I'm doing that every month for the Mansion Inglés newsletter. So if you want to have comprehension questions and reading that is a B2 C1 level, go to mansioninglés.com and sign up for the newsletter every month, and you can read those classic books.
There is one other thing I'd like to mention. Of course, you could read non-fiction, but here's the caveat. The caveat is like the special condition to make it easier. Reading about things that you already know about. For example, simplifying a bit, but if you know a lot about, for example, biology, let's say you're a biologist, read books about biology, because already you'll have a very solid base of the sort of things that they talk about. So you'll understand probably more than me, to be honest. So if you read non-fiction books about things that you already know a lot about, that will make your life easy as well.
Absolutely. And if you do come across some difficult words and expressions, before you start reading, you can also ask AI to take out 10 or 12 difficult collocations or words and then give definitions in English, simple definitions of difficult words, and then you can go through the text and look for them. So there are a couple of ideas there. I also want to mention a friend of mine and a student in my conversation class, Luis Gallardo, who's been working on an Anki vocabulary card generator for his e-reader. He is a computer programmer and designer, and if you are technically minded and you're interested in Lewis's progress on this, I will link to his blog in the show notes so that you can follow what he's doing. So in simple terms, he uses Anki to learn vocabulary, and directly from his e-reader, when he's reading a book in English, he can click on a word and it will automatically create an Anki card so that he can then go to Anki and start learning that vocabulary. So it's very clever, quite complicated, the work that's going on behind the scenes that Lewis is doing. But if you are interested in that, then there's a link in the show notes.
Okay, well, let's move on to our main input for today, which is based on, was it an email or an audio? An email, I think, yeah?
No, a message on our website, yeah.
A message on the website? Sorry, so not an email, a message on the website that we got from Manuel, who writes, I'll read out his words. I'm listening to this episode about new words while I'm commuting to work. He's referring to episode 600. In my country, Spain, in recent years, there has been a debate about neutral gender words like niño, niña, or niñe. To be inclusive with all kind, he should have said with all kinds, the word kinds can be plural in English, with all kinds of genders. Some people use the symbol at, like at that we use on the internet, the A with the circle around it. For example, in a letter or email, to address it to a man, a woman, or other. For example, when you see the word bienvenidos or venidas, it's the at symbol, which could be O or could be A, so it covers in Spanish, masculine or feminine. I heard that nowadays in English, words like fireman or policeman are, he wrote, in disused, we would say are not politically correct. And instead, firefighter and police officer are the words used to be a neutral gender. This could be an interesting issue to discuss in an episode. Yes, it certainly could, Manuel. It
certainly could, Manuel.
And here we are.
And here we are. Thank you very much for your idea. Well, first let's look at what gender-neutral language is. Well, it's a language that avoids showing the gender unless it's relevant to the context. And we also call this inclusive language because you're including all people, everyone, and it's non-sexist language, so neutral and non-sexist. And what's the purpose? Why do we do this, Reza?
Well, first and foremost, the first thing and the most important thing is to be inclusive, to include everybody, so no one is excluded. Another reason is to avoid assumptions about gender. Why should we assume that just because your job is putting out fires that you're a man? The majority maybe, but not all of them, not at all. Or if you work for the police, you don't have to be a man. So to avoid assumptions. And thirdly, well, basically to reflect modern society and professional roles, because things have changed. So if the facts on the ground have changed, the language should change.
Absolutely, yeah. And let's look at some common examples. So Reza just mentioned firefighters, people who fight fire. Well, before this language became kind of popular and politically correct, then we just used to say fireman.
Presuming they were men, because most of them were, or all of them were.
Exactly, yeah. Back in the day, long time ago, they were mostly men or nearly all men. And I've never said firewoman, have you?
No, I would accept it, but it sounds a bit odd. People prefer to say firefighter. They prefer to.
Yeah, I wouldn't say fire person either. So yeah, firefighter is the correct term. And then we also mentioned policeman. Notice the pronunciation there. I'm not saying policeman, I'm saying policeman. I'm using that schwa sound. Policeman, policewoman. Well, gender neutral would be police officer.
But strangely, we don't make the rules. We just are the messengers, listeners. People do say policewoman, don't they? That's common.
Yes, that's common.
Firewoman sounds odd. You won't hear that often, but people do say policewoman.
Yeah. Another one, chairman. Used to be very, very common back in the day when men were even more dominant in the business space. But these days, more correctly, you should say really chairperson. A person chairing a meeting. You can also say the chair, can't you? The chair of an organization or the chair of a meeting is the person who is controlling, who has the agenda, who is introducing people to speak. That's the chairperson or the chair.
Now, centuries ago, it was only really men who were concerned with financial affairs, so we always refer to businessmen. You can say a businesswoman, but it's much more common these days to say a business person. Therefore, you're covering male or female gender. Business person.
And back in the day, long time ago, I remember stewardesses on aeroplanes serving you food, making sure you were comfortable, looking after safety precautions, etc. And if it was a man, that would be a steward. And that has evolved over time to be flight attendant. So a flight attendant can be a man or a woman. It's a gender neutral term, a flight attendant.
And I've noticed, Craig, there on a cultural note, that there are a lot more men doing it now.
Yes.
I mean, there always were men, but not that many. But now the proportion of men is much higher as flight attendants, isn't it?
That's true. I've noticed that as well.
Also, postman used to be pretty much the only word that people used to refer to people who worked for the postal service. But of course, now women do as well. I would say it's about 50-50. Maybe even more women actually in Spain. Mm-hmm. So more commonly you'll hear postal worker, or perhaps even mail carrier. Not male, M-A-L-E. Not that male. Not male, female. M-A-I-L, that male, which is the same pronunciation. That type of mail carrier. Not a person who carries men around. No, that's a funny thought.
So that would probably be more common in American English because mail is more of an American word and post is more a British English word. So you'd post a letter in the UK and you'd mail a letter in the US. So a mail carrier more American English and postal worker more British. Next we've got, remember you can see these words listed on the website. Go to inglespodcast.com/619. You'll see all of the vocabulary there for you to look at and check as we're speaking. Salesman, that used to be quite common as well. These days, probably more common and correct to say sales assistant or sales representative. Person who serves you in a shop, for example, or sells you a car will be a sales assistant or a sales representative.
Yeah, and I'd say these days, there's at least a 50% chance that it's going to be a woman. I would say there's more female sales assistants than men these days.
Yep, in customer service. Also a cameraman. Again, that's quite a technical job, and years ago it used to be a lot more dominated by men, although I do know these days one or two females who operate cameras, and that is the new, more acceptable term, a camera operator. because operator is not gender specific. So a person who operates a camera, whether male or female, is a camera operator.
Actually, Craig, you and I know a female camera operator who did it, I think in the 1980s or 90s. Do you know who? An ex-colleague of ours, Claire.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
She was a camera operator.
That's true.
When there were very few women doing it. I think the 1980s, she was quite young at the time.
Yeah, a groundbreaker, we could say.
Yeah. She used to teach English with us at the British Council.
Yep, she did. I've thought of another example that's not on our list here. Barman.
A barman. Yes, that's true. We don't usually say bar woman, do we?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
That's true.
These days, the more appropriate term would be bartender.
Yeah.
A bartender, a person who tends the bar, who looks after the bar. A bartender would be the gender neutral word.
Okay, so those were some specific jobs. Now let's get into the world of general terms. And we'll start with a really important word, which, because it's so important, creates a lot of controversy. And that is the word mankind. I'm not talking about a kind man. That would be Craig, for example. He's a very kind man.
Oh, that's very nice of you. That's very kind of you, Reza.
Thank you. So kind, of course, can be an adjective, or it can be a noun in the sense of there are many kinds of jobs that you can do. But here it's together. It's a compound word, mankind, which really you should say these days as humankind, because of course we refer to the entire population of the earth, and of course about 50% of them are women. So you could say just humanity or humankind. Although if you want to specify, the word womankind does exist in the sense of, well, let's talk about the differences between womankind and mankind. In that case, there is a word womankind, but if you hear the word mankind used generally, you might think yourself it's a bit sexist. That's up to you to make that decision or not. They're probably referring to all of humankind.
Yeah. Here's a question for you, Reza. Trivia. Who said this and in which year? And he wasn't very woke when he said it. This is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Oh, that's got to be Armstrong as he landed on the moon.
In
1968 or 69?
I think it was 69.
69.
I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners and viewers. I think it was 1969. Yeah. So yeah, these days, probably nicer to say humanity or humankind. Another one is man-made. Some products are not natural. They are made by man, in inverted commas, but probably more gender-friendly to say artificial or synthetic. If something's artificial and synthetic, it's not natural. So really it means the same thing.
There's definitely no such word as woman-made. You'll never hear that. You might hear someone say made by a woman, but the other word I said, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, it just doesn't work, does it?
Another word which is beginning to fall out of use is manpower, because it basically means staff. So you could just use the word staff, or indeed the workforce, because who says everyone in your staff's a man? Of course, they probably aren't these days. So manpower has been replaced by workforce and staff.
Next word is manpower. Oh no, you've just...
Oh, we just did that one.
Sorry. The next one is the common man, which these days would probably be the average person. I don't know if you remember when you were younger, a very good album by Rick Wakeman.
I remember Rick Wakeman.
Oh, actually, wouldn't it be Rick Wake Person, wouldn't it?
Of course, very good.
Fanfare for the common man.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, these days the average person.
You'd have to say fanfare for a person, which doesn't have the same ring to it.
No,
it doesn't sound as good, does it?
Doesn't work, does it?
Yeah.
Sometimes woke doesn't work.
The next expression is very common even today, and that is the odd man out.
Yeah.
Although you can also say the odd one out, but we never say the odd woman out. We don't say that. So the odd man out or the odd one out, it means the one that's different to the others. For example, if I were to say to you, Craig, which is the odd man out? Apple, banana, pineapple, and chocolate.
I'd say apple, because that's the only one I don't like.
Okay, that's Craig's personal view. But
No, it's chocolate.
he's supposed to say chocolate, because the others are...
Not man-made.
Ooh,
Not
how dare you?
artificial.
That's better.
Not artificial.
Exactly. So the odd man out simply means the one in a group that's different. That's all it means.
The average person is the man in the street. So instead of saying the man in the street, because we probably wouldn't say the woman in the street, instead of saying the man in the street, say the average person.
Now, an expression which was invented not that long ago, and it's become really popular, is to man up. So we've even used the word man to create a phrasal verb. Remember, that's a verb plus a preposition, to man up, and it means to be brave. But maybe it's beginning to sound already outdated, even though it's quite new, because, you know, who says only men are brave? So that new word hasn't had a very long life, and it's already beginning to come into question.
Well, I'm not so sure. I would push back on that a little. To push back on something means to offer another point of view, and to partially agree, but to offer another way of looking at it. Because I think these days, being a man, standing up for your masculinity, protecting your family, having that manly role in life, I think that's coming back into society because of the male gender crisis.
That's true. You know what, Craig? Note for a future reference. What about a podcast on the manosphere?
Yes. What do you think if you're watching this? Do you think that's a good idea? If you do, write a comment and we will see it on YouTube. Yes, that's definitely a good idea. So we'll look at that, because some men these days are feeling uncertain about their role in society, and this idea of manning up again is coming back into fashion. So we'll look at that. But for the purposes of this podcast, then much better to say just be brave.
Now, Craig, as you know, I'm a big fan of man's best friend. What am I talking about?
You're talking about dogs.
Of course.
Do you think that's a phrase we should keep? Or if we don't, how do we change it?
I don't know if we should keep it or not, but it's still really common, I'll tell you that. I've never heard anyone say woman's best friend, but of course at least 50% of dog owners are women. But somehow this, you might say, sexist phrase has survived, and it's still very much used today. Man's best friend.
I mean, if you make that more gender neutral, what would it be? People's best friend, or I don't know, humanity's best friend?
Yeah.
Perhaps doesn't sound the same.
Doesn't sound as good, but you know why? I think there's a reason. Generally, the shorter, the better things sound. And man, it's one syllable, so man's best friend. Particularly three. Man's best friend. 3 sounds always gets well remembered in English. Even if you just said woman's best friend, it's not the same, because you've added an extra syllable. And the rule of 3 gives strength. It's purely a musicality issue.
Yeah, exactly. Now, speaking of dogs, a female dog is called a bitch, B-I-T-C-H.
Ooh, what have you said?
Well, it can be a swear word. You can call somebody a bitch, but you can use it, which is nasty. Be careful if you do decide to swear at someone, you bitch. It can be used also as a verb, to bitch, with a preposition about something. So to bitch can be, well, it's quite gender specific, because it would normally be a bad thing to call a female, but much nicer and gender neutral to say to complain, which is what it means really, or to criticize someone, but not necessarily openly, just to complain and to confide in someone in a negative way about someone or something.
Just to make sure this is clear, men can also bitch. It doesn't have to be a woman who bitches. So men can bitch about other men, and they do, you know? So just because a bitch is a female dog and it is an impolite way of referring to a woman, men also bitch. Not only women bitch about other people.
Exactly. Now, another expression which maybe needs to change, although it's still commonly used, isn't it, is no man's land. No man's land, land that belongs to no man. And this is territory that's often disputed between two countries. Say, for example, there's a war and there's an area of land and it's not sure if it belongs to this country or the other country. You could call that area of land no man's land.
Not many left now, but I think between North and South Korea there might be a bit of no man's land.
Yeah,
where
the DMZ.
The DMZ, the demilitarized zone, they've kind of agreed it's not yours and it's not mine. But if you go there, we'll shoot you. One side thinks about the other. It's a no man's land. By the way, big shout out to any listeners that we may have from North Korea. Thank you for risking your life by listening to us. If you're listening from North Korea.
If you are listening from North Korea, say hi in the chat. I very much doubt anyone's listening in North Korea, but you never know. You never know. A little bit of grammar here, moving to pronouns. Everyone must bring his book. That would be very male dominated. And we don't have a neutral pronoun as such, not a specific neutral pronoun. So what we do is we use the pronoun their, T-H-E-I-R, which you probably know is plural for the third person. Everyone must bring their book. Now that is neutral and it could be men and women, girls and boys, doesn't matter, it's gender neutral. So we often use the plural their, meaning his or her. And of course we can also say his or her, can't we, Reza? We can say everyone must bring his or her book, but it's a lot easier to say everyone must bring their book to the lesson.
Yeah, that's very, very common. And it's not that new. That has certainly been around since I was born. So it's not that new at all, but it's becoming more and more and more common. Perhaps a couple of old people, when I was young, in the 1970s, 1980s, a couple of old people might have said, no, his or her, but they were even a minority then. Everybody accepts that you can use they or them or the possessive form there as a singular to be non-specific about gender. That's not debated at all. There's nothing controversial about that one.
No, absolutely not. Now let's run through quite quickly some common collocations that you can use to speak about this topic of gender neutrality. For example, to promote equality is a common collocation, and to avoid bias. If you avoid bias, then you are not biased, you're not discriminating against a particular sex. So promote equality is one collocation you could use, and avoid bias is another.
Another common collocation regarding being neutral, gender neutral, beg your pardon, is to reflect society. So society has changed, so language needs to reflect society.
And politically correct, or PC as it's sometimes abbreviated to, really was the term we used before woke became a popular word to use. But we can still use it today, can't we? It hasn't gone out of fashion. So if you're politically correct, you're very aware of other people's feelings, you don't want to offend anyone, and you certainly don't want to insult people unintentionally. So being politically correct or woke or PC is a good thing.
Another common collocation you'll hear is to challenge stereotypes. So a stereotype is a cliched idea or thought, what people always used to think or still think. So if you challenge stereotypes, you are trying to change that established presumption.
Inclusive workspace, another common collocation. If you're working in an office, especially if it's an open planned office and men and women are working together in the same space, then you want it to be inclusive. You want to include all identities, all genders. So an inclusive workspace is an expression you might hear, a collocation you might hear, especially when you connect it to HR, human resources in a company.
So an example of an inclusive workplace might be that you go out of your way to be gender neutral. And that's our next expression. A gender neutral term is like when you say these words like niñe in Spanish, or saying they for he or her. You could even apply it to physical things. You could have a gender neutral toilet in your workplace to be an inclusive workplace. A toilet which is neither specifically for men nor for women. It could be a gender neutral toilet. Or you could take it a bit further, and that would be probably woke in many people's eyes. You could have a third toilet. You could have men or women, and you could have kind of trans or gender fluid toilets if you're so inclined.
Yeah. And finally, in our section of key vocabulary and expressions, we've got respectful language. You want to show respect, you want to be respectful. Respectful is the adjective, and if your language is respectful, then you are respecting people you're talking to. But Reza, obviously we're seeing some changes here. We're not using the language, we're not using English the same as we did years ago, 2015, even 10 years ago. So why has English changed?
Well, because social awareness has increased. I think it was inevitable because of the spread of media. First of all, what we call now the heritage media. So things like TV, first of all, and things like that. Because remember, even 70 years ago, not everybody had a TV. So first, the more traditional heritage, legacy media, as they call it. But now, of course, internet. So internet means that awareness spreads extremely fast. So it was inevitable that language was going to follow that increase in awareness.
Yeah. We're also noticing more women and other diverse groups in different professions. So as we mentioned before, and also men, as Reza mentioned, with flight attendants and what we used to call stewards, now men working in some service industries, then obviously the language changes to be politically correct for the changing professional world. So more women, particularly women in some jobs that used to be predominantly, mainly male oriented, that's why language is changing.
And of course, language influences perception. Even if you don't intend it to, it does, that's a fact. If we say the word fireman, immediately we're going to imagine a man. It's a bit like that old psychologist trick. If I say to you, think about anything you like in the entire world except an elephant, you're thinking about an elephant, aren't you? You can't not do it. So if you say the word fireman, you're thinking about a man. You won't be thinking about a woman. So we have to take that into account, that language influences how we think, how we visualize things, our perception.
That's right. But now it's your turn to practice your English. I've got a couple of questions for you. Do you think that changing language really changes society? What do you think? And can inclusive language ever go too far or be going too far with our attempt to make language accessible and kind to everyone? What's your opinion? Also, should language be regulated by government? Should we have laws and regulations on use of language to make it gender neutral? We'd be incredibly pleased to get your message and hear what you think. Reza, how can people reach us by voice?
Well, we think the best way is to send us an audio message. You can do that through SpeakPipe. There's a link in the show notes. It's to speakpipe.com/Inglespodcast. However, Craig, what if someone wants to write?
Yes, if you prefer email, emails go to me, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, at inglespodcast.com, or to write to Reza, Belfast Reza, R-E-Z-A, at gmail.com.
And don't forget, if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to improve your English with free or paid resources, why not visit the Mansión Inglés website? It's at mansioningles.com. And then specifically for paid products, you could also browse the online store, S-T-O-R-E, the store, the shop. That's at store.mansioningles.net.
And if you'd like a full transcription of the podcast so that you can read every word that we say, you might consider joining our Patreon program. And if you do so as a Patreon member, you receive the full transcription by email every week, and then you can follow us as we're speaking. You also get a monthly invitation to join me for an informal Zoom chat to practice your speaking. For more information, go to patreon.com/inglespodcast. And as usual, all of these links and details are on the website for this episode. inglespodcast.com/619.
And by the way, when Craig refers to the full transcription of what we say, he doesn't mean these bits of paper that we have in our hand. These are our show notes. These are merely notes to guide us. Not every single word is written here. Only a few words are written here to vaguely structure our podcast. You get much more than this if you sign up to Patreon. You get every single word transcribed. Just to clarify that, not this piece of paper, much more than that.
Exactly. And before we go, we'd like to say thank you to our more recent supporters on Patreon. We can't mention everybody, there just isn't time, but many thanks to Pablo Albert and Sue Chen, who have joined us this month. Thank you to you and to all our lovely Patreon supporters. Reza, what's next week?
Well, very appropriately, now that you can see us, and we apologize if we put you off your food or anything like that, we'll be talking about describing physical appearance in English in our next episode.
You better repeat that again in case we don't publish this. You better say that again in case we don't publish it.
Okay, so just in case we don't publish this because our physical appearance is too much for those of a sensitive disposition, next week we'll be describing physical appearance in English.
So thank you for listening this week. We hope you have a lovely week ahead. And until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.